Step aside, ma'am. You are holding up the priority line. Diana Caldwell did not lean in when she said it. She did not lower her voice the way someone might if they were trying to preserve even a shred of another person's dignity. She said it loudly, precisely, with the full authority of her position and the full exposure of Gate A7 at John F. Kennedy International Airport stretched out behind her. She said it the way people say things when they have already decided the outcome and simply want the paperwork to match. She had looked at the woman standing at the premium counter taken in the plain charcoal coat. The quiet posture, the absence of anything that fit her internal checklist of who belonged in a first-class enclave, and she had made her decision in under 3 seconds. That was all it took. 3 seconds and a lifetime of unchallenged assumptions. What Diana Caldwell did not know. What gate agent Connor Walsh did not know what Brooke Harmon with her champagne blazer and her 2 million social media followers absolutely did not know was that the quiet black woman they had just handed a Zone 5 economy boarding pass had not come to beg for her seat back. She had come to board a plane she already owned. And in exactly 45 seconds from the moment Diana slid that Zone 5 pass across the mahogany counter, that Boeing 777 sitting at Gate A7 would be legally frozen on the tarmac by direct federal order. The pilots would be pulled from the cockpit. The flight plan would be erased. A $240 million aircraft would sit dark and motionless under the floodlights of JFK, while 400 passengers watched the most powerful woman in the building walk away from the counter without raising her voice once. Before we go any further into this story, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been standing exactly where you were supposed to be and still been told you did not belong there? Drop your city in the comments right now. And if stories about power, dignity, and real accountability are why you are here, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Because what is about to happen at Gate A7 is something most people never get to see in their lifetime. Now, let us go back to where this all began. John F. Kennedy International Airport at 7:42 in the evening was not a place designed for peace of mind. Terminal 4 moved like a living organism, a churning body of rolling luggage and blinking departure boards and half-eaten sandwiches and children who had been awake 3 hours past their limit. Announcements overlapped in 4 languages. Business travelers walked fast and made eye contact with no one. Families had constructed small temporary settlements on the carpet near their gates. The air smelled of coffee and jet fuel, and the particular kind of stress that accumulates when hundreds of people are all running slightly behind schedule at the same time. Naomi Voss moved through none of that anxiety. She walked through the middle of it, not faster than it, not anxious about it, but straight through it with the calm, unhurried cadence of a woman who had long since passed the point where airports made her nervous. She was 41 years old. She had flown more than 300 times in the past decade alone. She had sat across negotiating tables in Doha and Frankfurt and Singapore and Dubai, and she had done it without raising her voice above a conversational register in any of those rooms. Airports were simply where the work happened between places. This one was no different. She wore a charcoal coat that was warm and well-made, and had been washed enough times that it had the look of something genuinely used rather than preserved. Beneath it was a dark navy turtleneck and clean dark trousers and flat boots that had covered serious ground. No visible logo on anything she carried. No jewelry worth a second glance. Her carry-on was a black rolling case that had been to more countries than most people visit in a lifetime and bore the scuffs to prove it. She had tied her locks back simply and without fuss. She was not trying to be invisible. She simply had no reason to perform. She had spent the past 6 days in Manhattan finishing the final terms of a financing agreement that would bring 22 new wide-body aircraft into the Meridian Capital Aviation portfolio. Meridian was not a household name. Aircraft leasing companies rarely were. The public tended to think airlines owned the planes they flew, and airlines were generally comfortable letting that impression stand. The truth was more complex, and for the people who understood it, considerably more interesting. Airlines leased the majority of their long-haul fleets from large, quiet, enormously powerful firms that held the actual title to the aircraft and collected lease payments the way landlords collected rent. Meridian Capital Aviation was one of those firms. It held principal lessor title on more than 400 commercial aircraft leased to carriers across 31 countries. It was not the largest firm of its kind in the world, but within the industry, it was regarded as among the most strategically positioned, and the woman who had built it from a single turboprop deal in her late 20s was regarded accordingly. Naomi Voss did not look like the person that description implied. She had worked very deliberately to ensure that she did not. She had watched too many people spend too much energy performing wealth and power, announcing it with the label on their bag or the name of the hotel they were leaving from, and she had decided years ago that she found that exhausting and unnecessary. What she carried instead was a quality that was harder to name and easier to feel, a particular stillness, the kind that belongs to someone who has nothing to prove to anyone in the room, because she has already answered every important question about who she is in private over years through work. She had wanted this flight. A grueling week of negotiations had depleted her in the specific way that high-stakes precision work depletes a person, not dramatically, not visibly, but in the bone-deep cumulative way that only rest can fix. She had an 8 o'clock meeting in London the following morning. She had a confirmed first-class suite on Flight 287, Seat 1A, which she had booked 6 weeks in advance and paid $17,400 for. All she wanted was to get on the aircraft, get horizontal, and sleep the Atlantic away. She bypassed the main check-in hall entirely and proceeded directly to the Premium Enclave, a walled section of the terminal with lower lighting and thicker carpet, and a counter that had been built to suggest through materials alone that the people who approached it were worth the extra expense. She stepped up to the counter and set her passport down and waited. She was about to find out what waiting cost her tonight. The gate agent behind the premium counter was Connor Walsh, 26, with hair set in place with something that smelled faintly of cedar and a collar button fastened 1 notch too tight. He had been working in premium check-in for 14 months and had developed in that time a particular skill for rapid visual assessment that he believed was professional efficiency, and that was actually something else entirely. He was typing when Naomi approached. He did not look up immediately. When he did look up, his eyes moved over her in a sweep that lasted less than 2 seconds and contained a great deal of information. None of it asked for, all of it applied. He looked at the charcoal coat and the plain boots and the carry-on without a visible brand, and he arrived at a conclusion before she had said a single word. The conclusion was wrong. It would cost everyone in Terminal 4 the rest of their evening. "Economy check-in," he said, pointing toward the main hall with a practiced courtesy that did not quite reach his eyes. "Counters 38 through 62, ma'am. I am checking in for Flight 287 to Heathrow," Naomi said. Her voice was smooth and unhurried. She placed her passport on the counter. "Seat 1A. First class." Connor's practiced expression flickered. Just slightly. He picked up her passport with 2 fingers, holding it with the particular care of someone trying not to commit to it, and typed in her information. A soft ping from his terminal. He typed again. Another ping. A small vertical line appeared between his brows. "There appears to be a discrepancy with your booking," he said. Naomi waited. "Our system is flagging a conflict with the seat assignment. It can happen when a reservation is made through a third-party platform." "I booked directly through Transatlantic Airways," Naomi said calmly. "The confirmation email I received this morning shows Seat 1A confirmed on Flight 287 on a Boeing 777-300ER. Connor looked at his screen. He typed. He looked at it again with the expression of a man looking for something he has already decided is there. "I will need a moment to review this," he said. Before he finished the sentence, the velvet rope at the entrance of the Premium Enclave was pushed aside with the energy of someone who had never once in her adult life been told she could not go somewhere. Brooke Harmon came through the gap trailing a carry-on bag that cost more than most people's rent, and wearing a blazer the color of old champagne that sat off both shoulders and fit close at the waist and drew the kind of attention she had learned to use as a professional tool. She was 29, and she was white, and she was the kind of beautiful that had been carefully maintained and strategically deployed, and she moved through space with the particular ease of someone who expected it to accommodate her. "Connor," she said, and managed to invest a single syllable with the warmth of someone who had learned years ago that remembering a gate agent's name was one of the most efficient ways to get what you wanted at an airport counter. "Thank goodness. Please tell me you held 1A. My assistant confirmed it, but honestly, you know how that goes." Connor's entire posture changed. The tightness across his shoulders released. The restrained professional expression became something brighter, more engaged, the face of a man recognizing a known entity, someone whose comfort he had decided in an instant was part of his job. "Miss Harmon, absolutely," he said. "Let me pull up your file." He typed. The brightness dimmed slightly. "I am seeing that your reservation is in the business class cabin," he said carefully. "Seat 1A in first class is currently showing as occupied." Brooke lowered her sunglasses to the end of her nose and stared at him over the frames with the expression of someone receiving a personally offensive diagnosis. "Business class," she repeated. "Connor, I cannot fly business. I have a shoot in Kensington tomorrow morning. I need the full suite. I need the flatbed. Fix it." Connor's eyes did something then that Naomi watched happen in real time. They moved from his monitor to Brooke, and then in a quick sideways drift to Naomi. He held the look for less than a second. Then he looked back at his screen. But Naomi had seen it. She had seen it the way you see a thing you have seen before and have learned to recognize. The arithmetic of it. The ledger. He had looked at Brooke Harmon and calculated discomfort that would be loud and visible and expensive. He had looked at Naomi Voss and calculated something he expected to be quiet and manageable and without consequence. He had done the math in under 2 seconds, and he had arrived at an answer that was completely and catastrophically incorrect. "I will need to escalate this to my supervisor," Connor said. "One moment." He reached for the phone behind the counter. Naomi did not say anything. She stood at the counter with her passport in front of her and her rolling case beside her, and she waited with the patient stillness of a woman who understood that the next few minutes were going to unfold in a particular way, and who had already decided exactly what she was going to do when they did. From across the enclave near the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out onto the tarmac, a woman named Sophia Reyes had been watching. Sophia was 31 and worked as a travel journalist and had been in this industry long enough to know the difference between an airline procedure and an airline excuse. She had been heading toward the priority boarding lane when she caught the shape of what was happening at the premium counter. The particular posture of the gate agent, the way Brooke Harmon had come through the rope, the sideways glance. She slowed. She did not announce herself. She reached into her jacket pocket and opened her camera application and pointed it at the counter, and waited to see what came next. 14 feet further back in the gate area, a man named Marco Delgado was sitting with his laptop open and his jacket folded over his carry-on. He was 38 years old and had built 3 logistics companies and understood from years of operating in spaces that had not always welcomed him the specific architecture of what was taking shape at that counter. He looked at the quiet woman in the charcoal coat, and he looked at the gate agent's body language, and he opened his phone and pressed live and said quietly to the camera, "We are at gate A7, JFK Terminal 4. I want you to watch what is happening at this counter right now." Connor had already dialed. The phone at the other end rang twice before it was picked up. Diana Caldwell was on her way. Diana Caldwell came through the door behind the premium counter with the efficiency of someone who had walked through that door several hundred times and had never once doubted that the space on the other side of it belonged to her. She was 34 and Caucasian, and she wore her terminal duty manager's uniform in the way that certain people wear authority, as though it had been cut specifically for her body, and her body had been built specifically for the role. The jacket was fitted at the waist and sat perfectly square at the shoulders. Her hair was blonde, pulled back in a way that sharpened the angles of her face. She was in any room the kind of woman who drew a second look, and she had learned over a long time to use that to her advantage to let the visual impression arrive before the institutional one and do some of the work in advance. She looked at the situation at the counter in under 3 seconds, the same arithmetic Connor had performed, but faster and with more certainty, the practiced speed of someone who has run this particular calculation many times and has never had reason to question the result. "Good evening," she said. Her voice was tuned to a register of smooth, professional warmth that contained underneath it something considerably colder. "I am Naomi Voss," Naomi said. "I have a confirmed reservation for Seat 1A on Flight 287 departing at 9:15. I would like to complete my check-in." Diana looked at Connor's monitor. She looked at Brooke, who offered a smile of the specific kind that says, "We understand each other, and I trust you to handle this correctly." Diana looked back at the screen. "Miss Voss," she said, and managed to make the name sound like a sentence that was already concluding. "Thank you for your patience this evening. I can see you have a booking in our system. Unfortunately, we have encountered a technical irregularity with the seat allocation for the first-class cabin on this particular aircraft. Due to an equipment substitution that was flagged during the final pre-departure review this afternoon, several of the suites in the forward cabin are currently under a maintenance certification hold. We are not able to assign them to passengers at this time." Naomi looked at her steadily. "The aircraft at gate A7 is a Boeing 777-300ER, she said. "I can see it from this window. It has been parked at that gate since 3:40 this afternoon." Something shifted in Diana's posture, a barely perceptible stiffening, the adjustment of someone who has been caught knowing less than the person across from them. But she did not show it for long. "The maintenance flag was raised during the final systems check," Diana said. "It was not visible in the earlier walk-round. I understand this is disappointing, and I want to make it as easy as possible for you. We have availability in the main cabin, and we can offer you a full travel credit toward a future first-class booking, along with our formal apologies for the disruption." She was already moving toward the printer. "I will not be accepting a seat in the main cabin," Naomi said. "I paid for a first-class suite, and I expect to receive what I paid for." Brooke shifted beside the counter. It was a small movement, a slight weight transfer from one foot to the other, but it communicated impatience with the specificity of someone who had been performing impatience her entire adult life. Diana glanced at her for a fraction of a second. "I do understand your position, Miss Voss," Diana said, and turned back with the expression of someone offering a very reasonable resolution to an unreasonable situation. "Our contract of carriage does permit the airline to modify seating arrangements when operational requirements arise. I am sure as a traveler you have encountered this kind of situation before." Naomi held her gaze. "Please call your terminal director." "I am the terminal duty manager," Diana said. "This is the appropriate level for matters of this kind." "I understand that," Naomi said. "Please call your terminal director anyway." Diana's expression did not change, but something behind it changed something in the set of the muscles around her eyes, a brief tightening that was not quite irritation and not quite unease, but existed somewhere between the two. "The terminal director is engaged with a separate operational matter," she said. "I assure you the resolution I have offered reflects exactly what the terminal director would provide." She paused in the way skilled administrators pause when they want the next sentence to carry institutional weight. "I do want to make you aware, Miss Voss, that if this situation continues to escalate and creates a disruption in the boarding area, I have both the authority and the obligation to contact Port Authority Police. That would not be my preference, and I would find it genuinely unfortunate for everyone involved. I hope we can avoid that, she said, genuinely unfortunate the way someone says it when they do not find it unfortunate at all. From across the enclave, Priya Navarro, 28, a junior gate agent who had been stationed at the secondary podium throughout the exchange, took 2 slow steps toward the counter. She had been watching Diana work for 2 years. She had watched this particular motion before the practiced pleasantness, the escalating institutional language, the pivot toward enforcement when the customer did not concede. She had always found a reason not to step forward. Tonight, something in her chest would not let that reason hold. Her booking was in the morning briefing log, Priya said. Her voice was careful but steady. I saw it myself. Seat 1A confirmed. Naomi Voss. Diana turned to her with a look that was perfectly composed and entirely definitive. Thank you, Priya. I have the situation managed. I thought she should know it was valid, Priya said. It is valid, Diana said. The issue is with the seat, not the booking. She let one beat pass. Please return to your station. Priya took 1 step back. She did not return to her station. Diana lifted the boarding pass from the printer. She placed it on the counter with the flat finality of someone filing a document they consider closed. Zone 5, main cabin seat 32D. Your travel credit has been applied. I hope you have a comfortable flight, Miss Voss. Brooke stepped forward with her passport and the relieved exhale of someone who has been waiting for a process to conclude. Naomi looked at the Zone 5 boarding pass on the mahogany counter. She looked at it for exactly the length of time it took to confirm that she had seen it and understood it and decided what to do with the information. Then she looked at Diana. You are going to regret this, she said. Not loudly, not with heat. Simply as a fact being stated by someone who already knew it to be true. Sophia Reyes had not moved from her position near the window. She had been filming for 4 minutes. Her phone was angled at the counter with the practiced steadiness of someone who had learned years ago that the most important footage is usually the footage taken before anyone knows it is being recorded. She had covered aviation disputes for 6 years, first for a regional travel magazine, then for a larger digital platform that had given her the space to tell the stories that the industry preferred to keep quiet. She knew the difference between a genuine equipment malfunction and a story being constructed in real time by someone with a title and a printer. She had just watched a story be constructed. She texted her editor, "Something is happening at a 7JFK. Do not sleep. I am sending footage in approximately 40 minutes. Her editor responded in 11 seconds. Send it now if you have it. She kept filming. Marco Delgado had been live for 6 minutes. His viewer count had climbed from 30 to just over 400 in the time it had taken Diana to print the Zone 5 boarding pass, and the comments were moving fast. People were asking questions. People were tagging other people. Someone who described themselves as a former airline employee had written in a comment that rose quickly to the top. That is not how an equipment substitution is announced. That is how you make someone go away. Marco read it without taking the camera off the counter area and said quietly to his audience, "You are watching this. I just want you to keep watching." And what they were watching now was Naomi Voss picking up the Zone 5 boarding pass and picking up her passport and picking up the handle of her rolling case and walking out of the premium enclave without looking back at anyone. Not at Diana, not at Connor, not at Brooke Harmon, who was already at the counter completing her own transaction. She walked out the way someone walks when they have somewhere specific to go and the direction is already decided. Sophia tracked her until she was past the velvet rope and into the main corridor, then panned slowly back to the counter where Diana was handing Brooke a boarding pass for seat 1A with the ease of a transaction completed satisfactorily. Marco said to his camera, "She just walked away. But watch the gate, because I have a feeling this is not over." Priya Navarro stood at her secondary podium and watched Naomi disappear into the corridor crowd. She felt something she did not have an immediate name for. It was not guilt exactly, though it had guilt in it. It was more like the particular discomfort of a person who has watched something wrong happen and done less than they could have and knows it. She had stepped forward. She had spoken. But she had also stepped back when Diana told her to, and the boarding pass had still been printed, and the woman in the charcoal coat had still left the premium enclave with a Zone 5 slip in her hand. She looked at the departure board. Flight 287, Gate A7. Boarding scheduled in 43 minutes. She looked at the gate area, the filling rows of passengers settling into their pre-boarding arrangements, the business people and the families and the students, all of them assuming the flight would proceed on schedule, none of them knowing that the situation at the premium counter had not concluded. Priya had been in this terminal long enough to recognize when a situation had concluded and when it had simply gone quiet. This one had gone quiet. She looked at the corridor where Naomi had disappeared and felt the low, persistent hum of something that had not been resolved, only relocated. She stayed at her podium. She kept her phone in her hand. She waited. Brooke Harmon had the boarding pass for Seat 1A in her hand, and she held it the way people hold things they have won. She was already taking a photograph of it, angling the phone so that the 1A was visible in the frame alongside her champagne blazer, already thinking about the caption. She had posted from 43 airports, and she had learned that first-class boarding content performed reliably. People engaged with access, with elevation, with the image of a life arranged at a premium level. She glanced over her shoulder at the velvet rope through which the quiet woman in the charcoal coat had recently exited. That was unnecessary, she said to Diana, not quite quietly. Some people just cannot read a situation. Diana straightened the items on the counter with the controlled movements of someone restoring order after a disruption. "The situation has been resolved," she said. Connor Walsh was back at his keyboard, the practice deficiency recovered the moment apparently filed away. He liked Diana. She was decisive. She did not let things drag. In 14 months of working under her management, he had watched her move through dozens of difficult passenger interactions, and she had always found a way to arrive at the outcome she had decided on. Tonight had been no different. He did not think about the woman in the charcoal coat again. He did not think about the way her confirmation had appeared cleanly in the system, the confirmed seat, the direct booking, the absence of any technical flag before he had gone looking for one. He did not think about Priya's voice saying the booking was in the morning log. He filed all of that in the category of complications that had been handled and returned his attention to the boarding preparations for a flight that was now 38 minutes from its scheduled departure. Naomi Voss was not at the gate area. She was not near the duty-free shops or the coffee kiosks. She was not at any of the information screens or the boarding lane markers. She had moved to a row of seats near the far end of the terminal corridor away from the noise of Gate A7 near a set of floor-to-ceiling windows that looked directly out onto the tarmac. Diana did not know this. She did not think about Naomi Voss for the next 12 minutes. She was focused on the boarding sequence for Flight 287 on the coordination with the ground crew on a minor issue with a passenger in the Zone 2 lane who had 2 bags where the allowance was 1. She was doing her job. She was good at her job. She had been good at her job for 9 years, and she had moved through those 9 years with the certainty of someone who has never been seriously wrong about a decision they have made from behind a terminal counter. She had not been seriously wrong in her own accounting because the people she had been wrong about had always simply left. They had taken the Zone 5 pass and the travel credit and walked away because that was what people in that particular situation did. They calculated the institutional weight of transatlantic airways against their own individual standing, and they decided the math did not favor a prolonged fight. They left. Diana's decisions were never tested because the people on the other side of them were never positioned to test them. She had not encountered Naomi Voss before. At 8:17 p.m., with boarding 22 minutes away, Brooke Harmon walked to the front of the Zone 1 priority lane and positioned herself immediately against the glass partition. She checked her phone. She posted the photograph of the boarding pass. The caption read, "First class to London. Not every day. But today, yes." The engagement came immediately, the particular velocity of an audience that had been trained to respond to access. She did not know that Marco Delgado's live stream was running from 12 feet behind her, and that his viewer count had just crossed 900, and that in the comments a former aviation attorney had written, "If that equipment story was fabricated, the airline has real exposure." Someone screenshot that counter-interaction. The reply beneath it, "Already done." Multiple angles. Sophia Reyes had moved to a position near the Zone 1 boarding lane entrance. She had stopped filming constantly and had switched to photographing the gate setup, the scanner position, the podium arrangement, the sight lines. She was in the way of a journalist who has covered enough stories to recognize one taking shape, positioning herself for what came next. She did not know exactly what came next, but she had been at this long enough to know that something came next. Diana made one more pass through the gate area at 8:22 p.m., checking the boarding lanes, confirming the scanner was calibrated, speaking briefly with Connor about the zone sequence. She carried her walkie-talkie on her belt and her supervisor's tablet under one arm, and she moved with the composed authority of someone executing a sequence they know by heart. She glanced once at the corridor that led away from gate A7, the direction Naomi Voss had walked. She felt nothing. No hesitation, no second thought. She had managed the situation. She had offered a fair resolution. She had maintained the boarding sequence. She had done her job. In 31 seconds, her walkie-talkie would produce a sound she had never heard directed at her gate before. In 31 seconds, the shape of this evening would change entirely. In 31 seconds, Diana Caldwell would begin to understand for the first time in 9 years of terminal management what it felt like to have been completely and irrevocably wrong. She did not know that yet. She walked back to the podium and told Connor to prepare for boarding. Naomi Voss did not walk fast. That was the thing that Sophia Reyes would describe later in the piece she filed at 2 a.m. from a hotel lobby in Midtown as the detail that stayed with her most clearly. Not the confrontation at the counter, not Diana's voice, not the Zone 5 boarding pass being placed on the mahogany surface like a verdict. What stayed with her was the walk, the way Naomi moved after she picked up that pass. Slow, deliberate, with the particular calm of someone who has made a decision and is now simply moving toward the place where the decision will land. She did not look back at Diana. She did not look at Connor or at Brooke Harmon, who was still at the counter, who had already won the thing she came for. She did not look at the velvet rope as she walked past it, or at the luxury display cases in the duty-free shops, or at the departure board that showed Flight 287 on schedule. She looked straight ahead, rolling her case behind her with the quiet precision of a woman who moves through airports the way other people move through their own homes. The Zone 5 boarding pass was in her hand. 40 feet from the premium enclave, she found a trash receptacle near the end of a row of waiting seats. She stopped. She held the Zone 5 pass for 1 second, looked at it with an expression that contained nothing recognizable as anger, and pressed it into a small, tight ball between her palm and her fingers. She dropped it into the trash. Then she sat down in one of the waiting seats, set her rolling case beside her, and took out her phone. Her face to anyone watching showed nothing in particular. Not agitation, not grief, not the visible heat of injustice in real time. What it showed to the two people still filming her from a distance was something closer to focus. The specific, contained focus of a person who has moved past the part of a situation where emotion is useful and arrived at the part where clarity is what is needed. She opened her encrypted messaging application. She scrolled to a contact she had not messaged in 8 months. She typed 4 words. Daniel. Call me now. The seats near the floor-to-ceiling windows at the far end of the Terminal 4 corridor were not the seats most passengers chose. They were slightly removed from the main flow of the departure hall without the coffee kiosk nearby or the convenient position relative to the boarding lanes. They were the seats chosen by people who wanted the noise to be at a slight distance. Naomi had chosen them deliberately. She sat and she looked out through the glass. The floodlights on the tarmac cast an amber wash over everything below. Ground vehicles moved in the patient, purposeful way of machinery that knows its sequence. Fuel trucks pulled away from the port wing. A catering vehicle was completing its service at the rear galley door. 2 ground crew members in reflective vests were doing a final exterior walk-round, moving methodically around the undercarriage, checking what needed checking, doing what the job required. The aircraft they were moving around was a Boeing 777-300ER. It was a large machine. Its fuselage stretched longer than most city blocks are wide. Its twin engines were the size of small houses. Its wingspan, if you could see it fully from above, was larger than most commercial properties. It sat at Gate A7 with the quiet presence of something operating at a completely different scale than the human beings moving around it. Naomi looked at the tail section. Just below the horizontal stabilizer in small black letters on the white field near the aircraft registration panel, N882TC. She recognized that registration number. She recognized it the way you recognize a thing you have seen on paper many times and now see in the world for the first time. N882TC was listed in the Meridian Capital Aviation Asset Registry. It had been listed there for 4 years since Transatlantic had signed the current lease agreement. It was by any legal definition that mattered her aircraft, her company's asset. Registered to Meridian, insured through Meridian, carrying a tail number that traced back to Meridian's corporate filings in the Federal Registry. The people inside Terminal 4 thought it was Transatlantic's plane. Most people thought the planes at the gates belonged to the airlines on the side of the fuselage. That was the impression. The impression was not the legal reality. She looked at N882TC for approximately 30 seconds. Then she looked down at her phone. Daniel Okafor was already calling back. She answered. "Daniel," she said. "Naomi," he said. His voice was even and immediately alert, the voice of a person who picked up calls from this particular number expecting that when they came at this hour they were likely to require something more than a routine update. "I am at JFK Terminal 4, she said, and she told him everything that had happened at the premium counter precisely without editorial, the way she had been telling important people important things for 20 years. "Talk me through what you need," Daniel said when she had finished. "Pull up the Meridian Master Lease database," she said. "Specifically, the entry for N882TC. She heard him begin to type. When Naomi Voss was 29 years old, she had been working in aviation finance for 4 years and had recently closed the deal that told her for the first time in a way she could actually believe that she was going to build something real. It was a lease agreement for 3 regional turboprop aircraft, small planes by industry standards, the kind that hop between regional airports where the gates are low-ceilinged and the carpets are a specific shade of institutional gray. The deal had taken 8 months to structure and had nearly cost her 2 investor relationships and a significant portion of her professional credibility because she had been young and unknown, and she had gone after something that people with more conventional credentials would have found easier to get. But she had gotten it. She had signed it in a conference room in Dallas on a Thursday afternoon and had called her mother from the parking garage and had not cried until she was in her rental car with the windows up. She had flown to Dallas for that meeting. She was flying back. She arrived at Dallas/Fort Worth International Airport with 3 hours before her departure and found the premium departure lounge on the upper level of the international terminal. She had a business class ticket earned through a loyalty account she had been building for 4 years, and a premier status card she had worked every flight to accumulate. She was dressed in what she always wore for travel in those years: dark jeans, a clean dark sweater, good boots. Her bag was a soft-sided leather case she had bought second-hand and had been using for 2 years because it was the best bag she had ever touched, and she did not see the point in replacing a thing that worked. She approached the lounge entrance and presented her boarding pass and her status card to the woman at the desk. The woman was white and in her early 40s and had the carefully managed appearance of someone whose job required a specific presentation. She looked at the boarding pass. She looked at Naomi. She looked at the boarding pass again. "This lounge is for qualifying business and first-class passengers and eligible status members," the woman said. The phrasing was technically identical to what it always was, and the delivery was something else. "I have a business class ticket," Naomi said, "and premier status. The card is right there." "I will need to verify the status," the woman said. She typed in the number from the card with slow, deliberate keystrokes. She looked at the screen. She looked at Naomi again. "The system is showing the membership under a different name," she said. It was the same name. Naomi Voss. The exact name it had been since the account was opened. "You can take a seat in the main terminal while I sort this out," the woman said. "I will come and find you when it is resolved." Naomi looked at the woman for a moment. Then she looked past her through the frosted glass panel beside the lounge entrance at the shapes of chairs and lamps and the quiet of a carpeted space that was 30 feet away from where she was standing. She thought about asking again. She thought about the 8 months that had just produced the piece of paper in her bag. She thought about the fact that she was 29 years old and had just done a thing that people with twice her resources had not done. She thought about whether any of that mattered in this particular 30 feet to this particular woman. She could see that it did not. She said, "All right." She picked up her bag. She went and sat in the main departures hall in the row of plastic-backed seats that faced the frosted panel of the lounge from across the corridor. No one came to find her. She sat there for an hour and 40 minutes. She watched the other passengers use the main terminal, the families and the business travelers and the students, all of them moving through the same space she was in. None of them thinking about the 30 feet of frosted glass that divided this terminal into 2 different kinds of experience. She did not look at the lounge. She looked at the departure board, and she looked at her hands, and she looked at the ceiling, and she looked at the bag that held the signed lease agreement that represented 8 months of work and every professional relationship she had earned to that point. She did not cry. She had not cried in an airport since she was 7 years old and had gotten separated from her father for 11 minutes at O'Hare and had believed for those 11 minutes that she was permanently alone in the world. She opened her notebook. The kind she had been carrying since she was 22, unlined, black cover real paper. She turned to a blank page, and she wrote 3 words at the top: "Own the infrastructure." She did not write anything else. She did not need to. She knew what the 3 words meant. They meant that if you do not own the space you are trying to enter, you are always going to be at the mercy of whoever decides who gets to come in. They meant that the answer to a door that keeps being closed was not to keep knocking. It was to go and purchase the building. She closed the notebook. She boarded her flight. She went home. Over the next 12 years, she built Meridian Capital Aviation from a single turboprop deal into a portfolio of more than 400 commercial aircraft leased to airlines across 31 countries. She had never publicly connected that portfolio to the 47 minutes she had spent in a plastic chair at Dallas-Fort Worth. She had never mentioned the woman at the lounge desk to anyone. She had at one point quietly purchased a controlling interest in the facility management company that held the lounge contract for that terminal. She had never mentioned that either. She did not need external witnesses for the things that mattered most to her. But now, sitting in a row of seats at JFK Terminal 4, looking out through the floor-to-ceiling glass at an aircraft that bore her company's registration number, she thought about that woman, about the absolute certainty in her face, the complete absence of any question. She had looked at Naomi Voss, and she had arrived at a conclusion, and she had never doubted it for a single second. Tonight, a different woman at a different counter in a different terminal had done the same thing. The same 3-second audit, the same arithmetic, the same complete confidence in a completely wrong answer. This time, the answer had consequences. Her phone buzzed. Daniel Okafor was typing. Daniel, I have the Meridian Asset Registry open. N882TC is listed as a Meridian Capital Aviation principal lease to Transatlantic Airways. Signed March of last year. What are we looking at, Naomi? She typed back, Section 12F, the Conduct and Reputational Integrity Covenant. His response took 4 seconds. 4 seconds was for Daniel Okafor a long pause. Daniel, you are certain. Naomi, I am certain. Daniel, give me 12 minutes. Daniel Okafor had been the chief legal partner of Meridian Capital Aviation for 11 years, and he had the specific kind of composure that develops in a person when they have spent enough time adjacent to very high stakes to have made peace with them. He had negotiated lease agreements in 4 languages across 3 continents. He had argued force majeure clauses in rooms where the opposing party had more institutional weight than most governments. He did not rattle easily. But Naomi heard something in his typing and the tempo of it that told her he was moving quickly. He called her back instead of texting. Talk me through exactly what was said, he said when she answered. Everything. The precise language. She told him. She told him what Connor had said and what Diana had said and what Diana had threatened and the specific phrasing of each escalation. She had a very good memory for language, particularly the language people used when they were in the process of deciding that someone else's rights were less important than their own convenience. She had been collecting that particular language for a long time. Daniel listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. She heard him moving through something on his screen pages or documents, the specific rhythm of someone navigating a file they know well. Section 12F, he said. I have it open. He read from it. If the lessee airline or any employee agent or management representative of the lessee airline engages in conduct of an overtly discriminatory or professionally abusive nature toward any passenger on any aircraft covered by this agreement, or engages in conduct that constitutes a credible threat of unwarranted law enforcement escalation against said passenger Meridian Capital. Aviation retains the right to declare an immediate event of default and execute a summary repossession of the relevant leased asset effective upon filing with the Federal Aviation Administration and the relevant airport authority. He stopped reading. You inserted that clause, he said, after the Alessi incident. Yes, Naomi said. A longer pause this time. Naomi, he said, I want to make sure you understand what filing this means. The moment the order lands with the FAA and JFK Tower, N882TC loses its operational clearance. The flight plan is pulled. The pilots are required to exit the aircraft. The boarding process stops. Every passenger on that flight is affected. I know, she said. And you have thought about the passengers? I have already contacted operations, she said. There is an available Delta A330 currently staged at Terminal 2. I need you to contact our operations team directly after you file and authorize them to reposition it to an available gate and release it for charter. Meridian will cover all passenger costs. Daniel was quiet for 2 seconds. You planned for this, he said. I did not plan for tonight specifically, she said. But I planned for the possibility. 3 years ago, after Alessi, I asked our operations team to build a passenger contingency protocol into the lease default procedure. In the event we ever exercised 12F, we would not strand the passengers. That has always been the plan. There was a sound on the other end of the line that was not quite a sigh and not quite a breath. It was the sound of a person who has worked with someone for 11 years and has just encountered a new layer of them. All right, Daniel said, and his voice had shifted into the register he used when work had genuinely begun. "I am drafting the filing now. FAA Regional Command Center, JFK Tower, and Transatlantic Corporate Dispatch simultaneously. Once I hit send, you have approximately 6 to 8 minutes before it hits the gate systems. Are you positioned to see the gate from where you are sitting?" "I can see the aircraft," she said. "Good." He paused. "Naomi, this is the first time in 11 years we have invoked this clause. After tonight, the industry is going to know it is real. Everyone who signed a lease with us, every airline that has a similar clause in their agreement, they are going to renegotiate. This changes the landscape." "I know," she said. "Is that all right with you?" "It is the point," she said. He was quiet for one more second. "Then filing in 10 minutes. I will text you the confirmation number. Watch the gate." She locked her phone. Outside, through the glass, the catering vehicle had completed its service and was pulling away from the rear galley door. The fuel lines had been detached from the port-side undercarriage. The ground crew was doing the final check of the wheel well area. The aircraft was almost ready to board. Everything on the tarmac was moving forward with the patient efficiency of a departure sequence that believed itself to be on schedule. Naomi sat with her hands resting on her knees and a rolling case beside her, and she looked at N882TC through the floor-to-ceiling glass, and she felt something that was not anger, and was not satisfaction, and was not grief. It was something cleaner than any of those, the particular clarity of a decision made completely and without residual doubt. She had warned Diana. She had asked for the terminal director. She had been threatened with police. She had been handed a Zone 5 pass by someone who had looked at her and decided in 3 seconds that she did not matter. She thought about the 36 people she employed at Meridian, who were black or Hispanic, or both people who had told her in exit interviews and performance reviews and quiet conversations after long days that the world treated them as though they were not quite where they were supposed to be. She thought about the passengers on every flight, on every aircraft in her portfolio, moving through airports like this one, being looked at by people like Diana Caldwell, having arithmetic performed on them at premium counters. She thought about 12 years between a plastic chair in Dallas and a window seat in JFK. She thought about what it meant to hold the infrastructure. Her phone buzzed. Daniel confirmation number 7741-M-FAA. Filed 8:31 p.m. FAA. Regional Command Center confirmed receipt. JFK Tower copy sent. Transatlantic Corporate Dispatch copy sent. Clock is running. 7 minutes to gate systems. She stood up. She smoothed the front of her charcoal coat. She took the handle of her rolling case. She turned toward the corridor that led back to gate A7, and she began to walk slowly with no expression that anyone watching could easily name in the direction of the gate. 7 minutes. She was not in a hurry. Gate A7 had transformed in the 31 minutes since Naomi had walked away from the premium counter. 400 passengers had settled into the particular organized density of a major international departure. Business travelers had claimed the seats with the best power outlet access and had arranged their laptops and their coffees and their expressions of practiced indifference to the chaos around them. Families with young children had colonized the carpet near the windows. A group of graduate students in matching university sweatshirts had taken turns photographing each other with the aircraft visible through the glass behind them, the kind of photograph that looks planned but is supposed to look spontaneous. The gate area had the ambient noise of a self-contained community in the final minutes before it has to go somewhere together. Conversations overlapped. Headphones were in. A toddler was attempting to eat a boarding pass that was not his. Everything was the normal, unremarkable noise of a flight that everyone expected to depart on time. At the front of the zone, one priority lane, Brooke Harmon stood with her rolling case and her phone and her champagne blazer and the 1A boarding pass that she had earned by being precisely the kind of person Diana Caldwell had decided deserved to have it. She was composing a second post. The first one had already accumulated 11,000 likes in the 40 minutes since she had posted it. The photograph of the boarding pass with the 1A visible. The caption had generated the specific kind of engagement that arrival at a premium level reliably generates, admiring comments. Aspirational comments, the occasional bitter one that she had learned to scroll past. She had not thought about the woman in the charcoal coat since she had walked away from the counter. There had been no reason to. The situation had been resolved. The seat was hers. The flight was boarding in 14 minutes. She angled the phone to catch the aircraft through the glass behind her. One more image before the boarding lane opened. At the podium, Connor Walsh was arranging his scanner with the precise fussiness of someone who used small powers to fill large spaces. He checked the boarding sequence. He checked the scanner calibration. He straightened the divider between the priority lane and the Zone 2 lane. He was ready. Diana Caldwell stood beside the podium with her tablet under her arm and her walkie-talkie on her belt, and the composed, satisfied expression of someone who has managed a difficult situation cleanly and can now focus on the routine work of an orderly departure. She had done this hundreds of times. Passengers with strong opinions. Passengers who believed their individual situation was exceptional passengers, who did not understand that airline operations required flexibility and institutional deference. She had managed all of them. This evening had required a slightly firmer hand than some, but the outcome was the same as it always was. The person who had refused to cooperate had accepted the resolution and left. The VIP was accommodated. The flight was on schedule. She told Connor to make the boarding announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen," Connor's voice came over the gate public address system. Transatlantic Airways Flight 287 with service to London Heathrow is now ready to begin boarding. We would like to welcome at this time our first-class passengers and our Diamond Elite members to present their boarding documents at the priority lane. Brooke did not wait for him to finish. She moved to the scanner with the ease of someone for whom this lane had always been designed. She held her phone to the reader. The scanner produced a sound that every experienced traveler knows and nobody wants to hear. 2 flat, discordant notes, low and final, and the light above the reader, which should have flashed green and unlocked the glass partition, flashed red instead. A hard, unambiguous red. Brooke lowered her phone. She looked at the screen display on the reader. She pressed her phone to it again. 2 notes. Red light. "The machine is glitching," she said to Connor. He was already leaning over his keyboard. "Let me run it manually," he said. "One moment." He typed in the reservation number. He pressed enter. And then his face did something he could not control. His color changed. Not slightly, not in the way that minor complications change a person's expression. His color drained in the way it drains from someone who has just looked at a screen and seen something that should not be possible. His eyes moved rapidly across whatever text was on the monitor, and then stopped as though the information had arrested the movement. "Diana," he said. His voice had lost its professional register entirely. "Diana, I need you to look at this." She crossed to his side of the podium in 2 steps, the efficient movement of someone accustomed to being the authority in her vicinity. She looked at the monitor. And then she did the same thing Connor had done. The composure that she had maintained with practiced precision for the entire evening cracked not completely, not visibly to everyone in the boarding area, but in the specific way that cracks begin at the outer edges of the eyes in the slight parting of the lips, in the momentary absence of the held expression. "What does that mean?" Brooke said, her voice tilting toward sharpness. "Your scanner is broken. Let me through." "Just one moment," Miss Harmon Diana said, and the pleasantness in her voice was audibly strained now the way a surface sounds when pressure is being applied to it from the underside. Her walkie-talkie crackled. The sound of an air traffic controller's voice over a gate walkie-talkie at a boarding lane is not a sound most passengers ever hear, because it is not a sound that is supposed to reach the gate area in this context. It is a sound that belongs in operations centers and ground crew channels. When it comes through a duty manager's radio in a public boarding lane, it means something has happened that has moved outside the normal administrative structure of the terminal. JFK ground to Transatlantic Duty Manager, Gate A7. Please respond. The boarding lane had gone quiet in the immediate rows. The people closest to the podium had heard the tone shift in Connor's voice and had looked up the way crowds look up when something changes frequency in a space they are occupying. Diana raised the radio to her mouth. "This is Caldwell. Go ahead, ground." "Ms. Caldwell, we have received a Code Amber asset grounding order filed directly with the FAA Regional Command Center by the registered owner of aircraft N882TC. Flight 287 is scrubbed pending legal review. Do not board any passengers. I repeat, do not board. The pilots have been ordered to cease pre-flight procedures and exit the aircraft via the service stairway. N882TC is under active repossession. Hold by Meridian Capital Aviation, effective as of 6 minutes ago. Port Authority police are en route to secure the aircraft exterior." Diana lowered the walkie-talkie. The silence that followed the transmission lasted approximately 8 seconds. In a gate area occupied by 400 people, 8 seconds of complete collective silence is not a pause. It is an event. It is the sound of 400 people simultaneously realizing that what they assumed would happen is not going to happen and waiting in the held breath of that realization for someone to tell them what comes next. Brooke Harmon was the first to speak. "Impounded," she said, and the word came out without its usual composure, just the word flat and unprocessed. She looked through the glass at the aircraft. She looked at the boarding pass in her hand. She looked at Diana. "What does that mean for my flight?" Diana did not answer her. The heavy metallic sound of the jet bridge door latch releasing came from the far end of the gate, and then the door opened and Captain Robert Haynes walked up the carpeted ramp from the boarding bridge, carrying his flight bag over one shoulder and his jacket folded over his arm. He was 56 years old and had been flying commercial aviation for 28 years, and he had the expression of a man who had been doing something for 28 years and had just been told for the first time that he was not allowed to continue doing it. Behind him came his first officer and the lead flight engineer, both with the particular expression of people who have been operating in a professional sequence and have had that sequence interrupted by something they do not yet understand. "Caldwell, Captain Haynes," said, and the single word crossed the entire gate area without effort. He had a voice that carried without being raised the voice of someone accustomed to being heard in large spaces. "What is happening on my aircraft right now? We were 8 minutes from initiating startup. The data link started printing legal documents. Operations just pulled the flight plan and told me to evacuate my own crew. Tell me what I'm looking at." Captain Diana started. He raised one hand. "Not loudly." The gesture said, "I have heard enough preambles tonight. Begin with the actual information." "A grounding order was filed," Diana said, "by the aircraft's lessor. There appears to have been a contractual provision triggered by an incident at the premium check-in counter earlier this evening." "A contractual provision," Captain Haynes repeated. He was working to keep his voice in a professional register and largely succeeding. "Someone explained to me how a gate check-in incident results in my aircraft being pulled from an international departure." Diana's composure was past the stage of small cracks. The whole surface of it was straining now. Sophia Reyes had moved to a position near the zone, one lane with her phone up and steady. Marco Delgado had stepped forward. His viewer count had crossed 2,000 and his audience was sending questions in real time. The murmur in the gate area had become a sound that moved in waves as the news traveled backward through the 400 people and their reactions traveled back forward. Brooke's voice came again higher now, the careful ease gone from it. "I have a brand shoot tomorrow morning. I cannot be delayed by whatever administrative thing is happening here. You need to get another aircraft. We do not have another 777 available at this gate," Connor said, and he said it quietly with the voice of someone who has just understood the dimensions of a situation he helped create. Then, Charter 1. Brooks' voice had found its sharp edge again. "I am a Diamond Elite passenger, and I expect the airline to honor its obligations." The walkie-talkie crackled again. "JFK, ground to Caldwell. Confirm receipt of grounding order. Confirm no passengers have boarded. Port Authority is at the exterior of the aircraft now." Diana raised the radio. "Confirmed," she said. "No passengers boarded." She paused. "Confirm receipt of grounding order." She put the radio down. She picked up the landline phone at the base of the podium and dialed the direct number for Transatlantic's Fleet Operations Headquarters in Atlanta. The line rang twice. Thomas Greer picked up. "Diana," he said, and his voice told her immediately that he already knew something. "Thomas, we have an active grounding on N882TC at JFK, she said. "The FAA pulled the flight plan. The pilots are off the aircraft. I need you to reach Meridian and get this cleared." She heard him typing. "Tell me what triggered it," he said. "There was a seating situation," she said. A first-class passenger was reaccommodated to the main cabin to resolve an overbooking issue. She was not cooperative, and the conversation escalated. I may have used firm language. "What is the passenger's name?" Thomas said. His voice was careful now. The careful of someone moving slowly in a space they have identified as dangerous. "Voss," she said. The booking was under Naomi Voss. The typing stopped. The silence on the line lasted 5 seconds. In a business call, 5 seconds is a long time. In a call between a duty manager who has just grounded a commercial flight and the VP of Fleet Operations of the airline she works for, 5 seconds is the sound of a man understanding the full shape of a catastrophe. Diana Thomas said slowly, "Tell me exactly what happened at that counter." Every word, nothing edited, she told him. And as she spoke, she listened to the quality of the silence on his end change, thicken, become the specific silence of someone taking in information that is considerably worse than the worst version they had prepared for. When she finished, Thomas said Naomi Voss is the founder and chief executive officer of Meridian Capital Aviation. Her company holds the principal lease title on N882TC. She is also the principal lessor on 17 additional aircraft currently operating in our long-haul fleet. Diana, you downgraded the woman who owns the plane you are standing under to economy class to give her seat to a social media personality. Diana's hand tightened on the receiver. The aircraft you are looking at right now is legally impounded. Thomas continued. The grounding is not a negotiating position. It is a filed federal action. The only person in the world who can lift it is the woman you just handed a Zone 5 boarding pass. You need to go and find her. Now, whatever it takes. Go! Diana replaced the receiver. She looked at Connor, who had heard enough to understand. She looked at Captain Haynes, who had heard enough to understand, and whose expression had traveled from professional fury to something more complex and less resolved. She looked at the 400 passengers whose evening had just changed permanently. She looked at Brooke Harmon, who was staring at the aircraft through the glass with the expression of someone watching something they expected to board becoming something they are going to have to explain. Then Diana looked toward the back of the gate area, past the boarding lanes and the stunned rows of passengers, past Sophia with her camera and Marco with his live stream, and Priya, who had moved from her secondary podium to the edge of the boarding area and was standing very still with her arms at her sides. At the far edge of the gate near the structural pillar in the charcoal coat, with the rolling case beside her and both hands at her sides, stood Naomi Voss. She had been there for 4 minutes. She had watched all of it, but she had not moved. Diana walked toward her across the full length of the gate area. Diana walked the full length of gate A7 to get to Naomi Voss. She walked past the priority lane and past the rows of passengers who had gone from confusion to something closer to understanding. She walked past Priya Navarro, who did not step aside to let her pass, but simply stood where she was and watched. She walked past Marco Delgado, who held his phone steady and said nothing to his audience because nothing he could add would improve on what they were already witnessing. Every step was visible. 400 people watched a terminal duty manager walk across her own gate area to approach a woman she had handed a Zone 5 boarding pass 45 minutes earlier. Some of them knew why. Some of them were still piecing it together. All of them were watching. Naomi did not move as Diana approached. She stood with her hands at her sides and her rolling case beside her, and she watched Diana cover the distance between them with the patient attention of someone who has all the time that is needed. Diana stopped in front of her. For a moment, Diana did not speak. The composure she had worn all evening, the architecture of practiced authority that she had built and maintained and deployed with such consistent precision was gone. What was underneath it was smaller and rawer and entirely unprepared. She looked for the first time all night like someone who was not sure what was about to happen next. "Miss Voss," she said. Her voice was her actual voice, now stripped of the professional shaping. "I have just spoken with our Vice President of Fleet Operations. I understand the situation. I understand what I did." Naomi watched her. "I was wrong," Diana said. "I looked at you, and I made assumptions, and I acted on those assumptions without questioning them. I moved you from your confirmed seat. I offered you a resolution I would not have offered a different passenger in the same situation. And when you declined it, I used language and institutional authority as pressure in a way that I should not have used." She paused. "I am asking you to lift the grounding order. I am asking you to allow the flight to proceed. I will reinstate your original boarding pass. I will make whatever formal acknowledgement of error you require. Please." Naomi looked at her for a long moment. Around them, the gate area was quiet, in the way it is when a large group of people are all concentrating on the same thing. "Reinstate my boarding pass," Naomi said. "Yes. Immediately. Seat 1A is yours. The aircraft," Naomi said, "has no active flight plan. Your pilots are off the aircraft. The FAA has a filed grounding order. You are offering me a seat on a plane that currently cannot fly." Diana's jaw tightened. "We can get it cleared. If you call your legal team and lift the hold operations can restore the flight plan within 20 minutes, the pilots can reboard. We can still depart tonight late, but tonight." Naomi held her gaze. "I want you to understand something," she said. And she said it at conversational volume without raising her voice or addressing the crowd behind Diana, simply speaking to the person in front of her as though they were the only two people in the space. "You looked at me tonight, and you performed a calculation. You looked at the woman at the counter before you, and you made a decision about who she was and what she was worth, and how much consequence her discomfort would carry. You made that decision in approximately 3 seconds. You did not ask a question. You did not verify anything. You simply decided." Diana did not speak. "And then, when I declined what you had decided I should accept," Naomi continued, "you escalated. You used the word police. You used the weight of institutional authority as a threat against a passenger who was standing at a counter asking for what she had paid for and had every right to receive. You used it to end the conversation, to make the math work, to make me walk away." Diana's eyes dropped for a moment. Then they came back up. "I did," she said. "I know you did," Naomi said. "And I also know you have done things like it before, not to the same person, not in the same way, but the pattern is not new. You have managed this terminal for 9 years, and the reason this particular tool has remained in your kit for 9 years is that it has always worked. The person at the other end of it has always left. They take the Zone 5 pass and they go because they calculate that the institution wins and they do not. That calculation has been correct every single time. She paused. Until tonight, Naomi said. From behind Diana, Brooke Harmon had pushed through to the edge of the small circle that had formed. She was close enough to hear everything. This is a business transaction, Brooke said, and her voice had lost the ease and the confidence and the practiced social warmth, leaving something more exposed underneath. You are canceling a flight for 400 people because of a seat. People with real plans and real commitments and real lives are being delayed because of a disagreement at a check-in counter. Naomi turned and looked at Brooke for the first time directly. She looked at her with the unhurried, clear attention of someone who has known a thing was there and has now chosen to address it. 400 people are not being stranded, Naomi said. She raised her voice slightly enough to be heard clearly beyond the circle immediately around her, enough to reach the rows of passengers who had been watching and listening and wondering since the walkie-talkie had crackled. She spoke to the gate area. My name is Naomi Voss. I am the founder and CEO of Meridian Capital Aviation, the company that holds the lease on the aircraft at this gate. I want every passenger here to know that Meridian has already contacted its operations team and authorized the repositioning of a Delta A330 from Terminal 2 to Gate B6. That aircraft will be ready to begin boarding in approximately 90 minutes. Every passenger on Flight 287 will be accommodated on that aircraft in equivalent or upgraded seating at no cost. Additionally, Meridian Capital Aviation will cover hotel accommodations in London for any passenger whose connecting plans are affected by this delay. The gate area was quiet for a moment. Then, from somewhere in the middle of the 400 passengers, a single person started to clap. Not loudly, not dramatically. The slow, deliberate clap of someone who has just witnessed something and needs a physical response to it. Then the person beside them. Then a few more. The sound moved through the gate area and became something broader and more sustained. Not wild, not celebratory, but real. Priya Navarro, standing at the edge of the circle, was clapping. Her eyes were wet. She did not try to conceal it. Captain Robert Haynes, who had been standing to one side since Diana had walked away from the podium, walked forward. He stopped in front of Naomi, and he looked at her with the direct, undecorated attention of a man who has been in his profession long enough to recognize what he is seeing when he sees it. Ma'am, he said, I want you to know that I am sorry. Not on behalf of the airline, on my own behalf. What happened at that counter should not have happened. I did not see it. I should have been positioned to see it. He paused. I have been flying for 28 years, and I have never once been pulled from a pre-flight, but I would rather know that this is why it happened than not know. Thank you, Captain, Naomi said. She meant it. He nodded and stepped back. She turned to Diana. The aircraft will remain grounded, Naomi said. Tonight and for as long as is required for Transatlantic Airways to complete an independent review of its terminal management practices and its customer accommodation procedures. Meridian Capital Aviation will be in contact with your corporate headquarters in Atlanta to outline the terms of the consent agreement. Your legal team will receive the formal documentation before midnight. Diana looked at her. There was nothing left of the evening's composure. What was there instead was something quieter and less comfortable and more honest. You are right, she said. About the pattern. You are right. Naomi held her gaze for one more moment. Then she turned, picked up the handle of her rolling case and began to walk toward Gate B6. She did not look back. The gate area of a 7 settled into a particular quiet after Naomi turned and walked away. It was not the silence of a crowd that had not received an answer. It was the silence of a crowd that had received more of an answer than they expected and was taking a moment to absorb it. Naomi stopped. She had walked approximately 20 feet from the circle around Diana when she stopped and turned back to face the gate area. not to the immediate circle, but to all of it, the full 400, the families and the business travelers and the students and the elderly couple in the second row who had been holding hands since the walkie-talkie first crackled and had not let go. She addressed them directly. "I want to say something to everyone in this gate area," she said. Her voice was clear and carried without effort, the voice of someone who had spoken in large rooms for a long time and had never needed amplification to be heard. What happened tonight at the premium counter in this terminal is not an isolated event. It is a pattern of behavior that has existed in this terminal and in terminals like it for a very long time. It has existed because the people on the receiving end of it have consistently calculated that the institution is stronger than the individual, and they have left, and nothing has changed. I have been on the receiving end of that calculation many times over many years. Tonight I was in a position to change the math. She paused. "The aircraft at gate A7 will not fly tonight," she said. "That is a consequence of what happened at the premium counter, and it is the right consequence. But you are not the parties who created this situation, and you will not be the ones who bear its cost. The replacement aircraft at gate B6 will be ready in 90 minutes. Every seat on that flight is yours. There is nothing you need to do except walk to B6. My team will handle the rest." A man near the front of the crowd, gray-haired in a dark jacket, raised his hand as though he were in a classroom. He lowered it when he realized he was doing it. Then he just spoke. "Did you know when you walked away from that counter that you were going to do this?" he asked. Naomi looked at him. "I knew what my options were," she said. "I chose the one that seemed most likely to produce something lasting." He nodded slowly. A woman with 2 young children, one of them asleep against her shoulder, called out from 4 rows back. She didn't shout. She just said it at a volume that carried. "I am sorry that happened to you." Naomi looked at her. "Thank you," she said. "And I am sorry your evening went this way." The woman shook her head slightly. "Don't be," she said. "My kids are going to grow up having seen this." Sophia Reyes lowered her camera for the first time in 40 minutes. She looked at the footage. She had collected 17 minutes of uninterrupted documentation, and she felt the specific sensation of a journalist who has been in the presence of a story that will not require her to construct a narrative only to convey it clearly. Marco Delgado's viewer count had crossed 4,000. The comments were moving so fast they were illegible. He said to the camera, "You just watch that happen. I don't have anything to add." Priya Navarro was standing near the secondary podium she had occupied all evening. She watched Naomi address the gate area, and she felt the thing in her chest that she had not been able to name earlier complete itself into something recognizable. It was not guilt anymore. It was resolve. The specific forward-facing resolve of a person who has watched something happen and has decided they are going to carry the lesson of it into every day of work that comes after. She pulled out her own phone and opened the internal reporting portal for Transatlantic Airways. She began filing a formal written account of everything she had witnessed at the premium counter, time-stamped in her own words, with the names of everyone involved. She did it while Naomi was still in the gate area. She did not wait. When Naomi finished speaking to the crowd, she did not take questions. She nodded once to the gate area as a whole in the way of a person acknowledging a shared moment, and then she turned and walked toward the corridor that led to Terminal 2 and Gate B6. The crowd began to move, gathering bags and children and carry-ons, adjusting plans, orienting toward B6. There was conversation in it now, the particular animated murmur of people who have witnessed something together and are comparing notes. Sophia caught up to Naomi at the entrance to the corridor. "Just one question," she said. Naomi looked at her. "When you dropped the Zone 5 pass in the trash," Sophia said, "was that the moment you decided?" Naomi was quiet for a second. Then she said, "No. I decided when she printed it. The trash was just the last step." She turned and continued walking. By the time Naomi Voss settled into her seat on the Delta A330, positioned at gate B6, the consequences had already begun to move with the speed that public accountability moves when a thing has been witnessed by enough people in enough formats simultaneously. Diana Caldwell was escorted out of Terminal 4 at 11:52 p.m. by a transatlantic human resources representative on a video call from Atlanta and 2 Port Authority officers who stood at a professional distance and said nothing. Her security badge was deactivated at 11:54. Her system access was revoked at 11:56. She walked out of the terminal in her tailored uniform, carrying nothing except her coat and her phone. The phone showed 47 missed calls. She did not answer any of them. There was nothing to say that would change the shape of what the evening had revealed about her. Connor Walsh received a suspension notice via email at midnight and was out of the building by 12:20 a.m. He had been the first person in the chain to make the choice that started everything. The sideways glance, the arithmetic, the call to the supervisor. He had not invented Diana, but he had provided the opening she had walked through. His career at Transatlantic, which had lasted 14 months, ended without ceremony. Brooke Harmon had not made it to London. She had attempted to reach gate B6 and rebook on the replacement flight and had been politely informed that Transatlantic could not confirm her seat on a Meridian chartered aircraft given the active default situation. She had tried 2 additional carriers before midnight. Neither confirmed her booking. The clip of her voice from the premium counter, 4 seconds of audio, in which she said the words, "Take the coach ticket and go where you belong," had been extracted from Sophia's footage and attached to her name in approximately 300 separate articles by the time the sun came up over New York. Her Kensington shoot was postponed. 2 brand partnerships issued statements by Friday morning. A third did not renew. She spent the night in an airport hotel. She did not post from it. Transatlantic Airways TCA opened down 6% on Friday morning. By the close of trading, it was down 11%. 3 financial analysts downgraded the stock. The coverage was not primarily about the operational disruption. It was about what the footage showed about the culture that had produced it. The specific language of Diana Caldwell's voice. The specific ease with which a confirmed first-class booking had been rewritten as an operational necessity. The specific speed with which institutional authority had been deployed as a threat. In Atlanta, Peter Carmichael, the CEO of Transatlantic Airways, watched the overnight coverage on the monitors in his boardroom and did not speak for a long time. Then he said, "Get me Daniel Okafor. Tonight." The call lasted 40 minutes. The consent agreement that followed was drafted over 4 days and signed the following week. It included an independent audit of gate and check-in practices at all 12 of Transatlantic's major hub airports, a new passenger accommodation protocol that required 2 supervisor sign-offs for any involuntary downgrade from a confirmed premium booking, and a passenger equity board with external representation that would have genuine oversight rather than advisory status. The aircraft N882TC returned to commercial service 3 weeks later, at Naomi's request, and not as a term of the consent agreement, but as a personal decision she made unilaterally and communicated to Transatlantic's operations team in a single line of an email. The aircraft was renamed. The letters were painted in small, clean script just below the cockpit window on the port side, the Dignity. No press release accompanied it. No announcement. The crew who flew N882TC's first flight back into service saw the name when they did their exterior walk-round. The first officer, a 31-year-old Latina woman who had been flying for 7 years, stopped when she reached the nose of the aircraft and stood there for a moment reading it. Then she took a photograph and sent it to her mother without a caption because no caption was necessary. Priya Navarro's formal witness report was submitted to Transatlantic's internal compliance team at 12:08 a.m. On Friday morning, before the story had fully broken, before the extent of the coverage was clear, before anyone could accuse her of filing it for the purpose of strategic positioning rather than honest record. She filed it because it was true and because she had decided, standing at her secondary podium watching a woman in a charcoal coat address 400 people with the composure of someone who had been preparing for this moment for 12 years, that she was not going to be the person who stayed quiet again. 2 weeks later, Priya was promoted to Terminal Operations Lead at JFK Terminal 4. Her first act in the new role was to rewrite the Premium Counter Reaccommodation Protocol. Under the new procedure, no involuntary downgrade from a confirmed first-class seat could be processed without a documented operational justification signed by 2 supervisors and a written record of the alternative options offered and the reason each was declined. The form was 1 page. It was clear. It made invisible decisions visible. She named the form internally. She did not announce the name publicly. But the people who used it every day knew. They called it the Voss Protocol. The story did not disappear in 2 weeks the way airport stories usually disappear, consumed by the speed of the news cycle and replaced by the next urgent thing. It stayed because what had happened at Gate A7 was not just one woman's experience. It was the experience of every person who had ever been redirected to the wrong counter, given a creative reason why their confirmed booking was suddenly complicated, or had the institutional authority of an airline used against them as a threat. Thousands of people recognized it, not from reading about it, from having lived it themselves. They did not have the same resources Naomi had. They did not have the same outcome. But they recognized the specific shape of what had been done to her, and they recognized it immediately, and they did not forget it. Transatlantic fulfilled every term of the consent agreement, and over the following months was publicly cited by 2 separate civil aviation monitoring organizations as having made genuine structural improvements. Not performative ones, real ones. Complaints related to involuntary premium downgrades dropped. Passenger satisfaction in terminal interactions improved. Several of the airline's own employees, gate agents, and check-in staff who had seen the footage and recognized behaviors they themselves had been trained into requested access to the new equity training materials before the rollout was formally scheduled. They did not wait to be told to change. They asked, and Naomi Voss flew back through JFK Terminal 4 8 months later on a different flight. She checked in at the premium counter without incident. She walked through the boarding lane. She found her seat. She did not announce herself. She did not look for recognition. She sat down, accepted the glass of water that was offered, and opened her notebook. She wrote 1 line at the top of a fresh page, the same kind of notebook she had been using since she was 22, unlined black cover real paper. Then she closed it, looked out the oval window at the tarmac below, and settled into the particular peace of someone who has done the necessary thing and is ready for whatever comes next. I want to speak to you directly before we close this story because this one has stayed with me longer than most. What strikes me most is not the corporate mechanism, not the lease clause or the grounding order or the financial consequences as satisfying as those are to witness. What stays with me is the 12 years. 12 years between a plastic chair in Dallas and a window at JFK. 12 years of building something real brick by brick, deal by deal, without waiting for anyone to validate it or acknowledge it or give her the room she had already decided she was going to occupy. And then standing at a counter in a terminal she moved through regularly and watching a woman spend 3 seconds deciding from the outside of the charcoal coat that she did not matter. The lesson I keep returning to is this. The most dangerous assumption is the one you make before you ask a single question, not because it will always carry the consequence it carried here. Most of the time it will not. Most of the time the person on the receiving end of that assumption will take the Zone 5 pass and walk away because the math seems to say that is the only option. The lesson is not that every assumption gets corrected. The lesson is that every assumption costs something. It costs the person it is aimed at something they can never fully recover a piece of. The evening, a piece of the confidence, a piece of the belief that the space they are standing in is one that will see them clearly. That cost is real whether or not the person handing over the Zone 5 boarding pass ever understands it. And to anyone watching this who has ever been handed a metaphorical Zone 5 boarding pass by an institution, by a colleague, by a room that decided before you opened your mouth what kind of person you were. I want to say this: your presence in that space is not contingent on their recognition of it. You belonged there before they looked up. You belong there still. What Naomi Voss understood all the way back in that plastic chair in Dallas at 29 years old was that the answer to a closed door is not to keep knocking on that door. It is to understand the structure well enough to walk through a different one. That understanding and the work it takes to build it is available to every one of us. If this story moved, you share it with someone who needs it. Drop a comment below and tell me what part of it landed hardest for you. And if you are new to this channel and stories about dignity, accountability, and the quiet power of knowing exactly who you are why you watch, hit that subscribe button. I will see you in the next one.